channeling my mache, we have good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us for the March 10th SIG CLI bi-monthly meeting. My name is Eddie Zaneski, and I will be your host today. We have a couple quick announcements to get started with. Code freeze was yesterday, so hopefully we got everything in that we needed to. We were scrambling a bit last minute to approve some PRs. We have a contributor survey for 2021. Did one of y'all put this on here? Or was this Mache? Probably. We'll take a look at the contributor survey. This is used to provide feedback to SIG Contribex to see how the health of the contributors and the project are going. So take some time, fill it out. It shouldn't take you that long. And we've definitely seen change come from that survey. So we have work in progress for the annual report. Mache kicked this off before he went on vacation. And so this is just kind of like a quick update. It's looking for feedback from contributors and folks in the community. I think I have to go through it as well still too. I haven't looked at it, but give it a read. This is our chance to share everything with the rest of the community and I believe the CNCF. And there's I think a meta issue. There we go. So this is actually what we need out of this. And then definitely last but not least, we have to give a big shout out to Jeff and Natasha, and I'll let Jeff name any other folks that we need to mention, but the Kustomize team took a huge undertaking to upgrade Kustomize in Kube Control, and it made the release. So big shout out to the team.
Donnie and Katrina from Apple, and Phil has contributed a lot to KML as well. So yeah. Anyway, let's not celebrate until it's actually shipped and not rolled back.
Well, thank you all for your hard work, for sure. We'll celebrate then. Absolutely. All right, cool. So let's start off with some introductions. Do we have anyone on the call that's new that would like to introduce themselves? I'm seeing familiar names. Okay, going once, going twice. Feel free to speak up later if you want. All right. And on that note, the first topic we have on the agenda is we want to work towards building a more diverse SIG and team, and especially leadership team. So I'll toss over to Sean to get us kicked off discussing some brainstorming we can do there.
Yeah, I was just hoping to take a few minutes here at the beginning of our meeting to query you guys to find out what to basically brainstorm and to ask you guys, are there any are there any things that we can undertake in order to make our team a more diverse and inclusive? So we recognize, and it's kind of been, it was a very small shock. We actually tried to, we set up and scheduled a SIG CLI presentation for our, for KubeCon EU. And we, once we did it, you look at the schedule and there are four guys who are, pretty much all the same color. And it kind of really brought into relief the idea that whatever our diversity and inclusion goals are, it doesn't appear that we are approaching them. And so we wanted to query you guys, query the rest of the team. What is it that we can do, from the small to the large, from the cultural to maybe even just small little programs. I put on their mentorships. I know that CNCF has mentorships, and years ago we had been included in, involved ourselves in that. But what is it? Does anybody have any ideas on, again, from the small and cultural, maybe what we do at the beginning of every meeting? Does anybody have any ideas on how we could make our team more diverse and inclusive? Cool.
I think mentorship is a great angle, and I'd be curious to know more about what that program has looked like in the past and for other SIGs that you're mentioning. I know it can be tough to get involved, especially if you don't have anybody else, say, in your company, or any more direct contacts with projects that are ongoing. There can be a fairly substantial barrier to figuring out how to help. So mentorship could be an easy way to get people feeling more a part of the community.
I think our previous mentorship was through Outreachy, which is someone has put on the doc. But it's been so long, to be honest, I've forgotten how that worked. And I think it was last time it was spearheaded by Phil, who's not here today. So I'll put that on the doc as well, that we should talk to Phil about the previous mentorship that he spearheaded. Talk to Paris. That's a good idea.
Yes, we talked about this yesterday a bit on the SIG Leads call, and Ilana is actually kind of piloting I forgot how they described it, but it was basically a program that is designed to help people move from a reviewer, so to speak, to a kind of like SIG chair lead role. And so it was very initial conversation we had. I think we're going to discuss it more in depth, but it's definitely something that folks are realizing is we need to start nurturing and training, especially underrepresented groups, for the next generation of SIG leads. So yeah, there's definitely the pressure from other places as well. Everyone wants to, build better teams. Outside of mentoring, though, what else can we think of? That's probably the biggest one, right?
That's the one that first comes to mind.
Yeah, I guess that's a really good point too, that there's a couple different levels of mentorship that would need to happen if our target is to get people in leadership, because you have to have more people involved in the first place to develop even candidates for that. And then you have to have a program to help them get up to speed to the level that is required for leadership.
Yeah, the Contributor Summit's been a great place in the past. That's actually how I got involved with the SIG in the first place. And we had the meet the contributors there, and I don't think I brought it up yesterday as well, and it sounds like it hasn't been as successful digitally. Not enough mentors were showing up. So if we can push for that again, possibly, and folks can volunteer. I actually didn't even know that these programs are going on. So I think it's a marketing issue as well as a participation issue. So.
When is the next Contributor Summit? Do you happen to know, Eddie?
I know that the EU one, no, the NA one didn't happen. I know it was canceled because it was digital, obviously. I don't know if they're doing one for EU, so I can check in on that. LA at the end of the year is North America for Los Angeles is supposed to be in person as of now. So I don't know if that's actually going to happen or not. So,
well, woot, that's good news.
So for this topic, I was just hoping to kick it off. I know that we can, we can add whatever items to our arsenal of how we intend to make the team more diverse and inclusive. And for this anyway, I just wanted to kick it off, put the idea in people's minds, come up with brainstorm a few ideas on where to start. And yeah, again, mostly just kind of wanted to put the idea in people's minds that this is something that not only should we pay lip service to, but actually we're going to spend time on the team for.
Yeah, I think we've talked about carving out better good first issues, so that's a good place to start getting some new contributors too. I think I've thrown this statistic around for years, and I no longer have a source for it. But if you respond as a maintainer to someone's issue or pull request within 48 hours, they're 90% likely to contribute again. So I think that definitely puts a little burden and onus on us as maintainers and contributors to kind of help new people come along, because I'm sure remembering back to your first issue or pull request, it's very intimidating, especially when this bot starts spitting a bunch of instructions at you. So I definitely need to step that up myself.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I'm looking at the contributor list for customizers now. 263 people, and of course, a contributor is anybody who's even just filed one issue. But responding on PR, suggesting how to write unit tests, how to make comments better, all that stuff is pretty easy to do and simple. But in terms of diversity, it's really hard to tell from somebody who's it's hard to tell if you're addressing any sort of diversity issue. You're certainly increasing the number of contributors, which should automatically pull in diversity, but let's see.
But thank you for putting this on the agenda, Sean, for sure. It's something we need to start putting a bunch of effort into. So any other thoughts or comments on this?
So maybe it's something we'll revisit, for a couple minutes at the beginning of our meetings, just to make sure that I don't drop the ball. We don't.
Yeah, and I'll dig more into the mentorships, and we'll see where the SIG leads discussions go as well. I'll share any updates I get.
Cool. Thanks, team.
Yeah. Oh, we do have Katrina. I think this is you, right?
Yep. Yeah, so this is an issue on kube control, and I would like to start work on one of the options that I proposed. None of this is a huge change, but one of the, I think probably the best option in my opinion would involve exposing a flag on additional commands that it doesn't exist on today. So it's something I wanted to bring up with all of you. The underlying issue is that the chunk size flag gets turned into a limit parameter, and the limit parameter gets used not only to limit the number of results in the set that's returned to the client, but also the number of results that are specified as the limit for the etcd query itself. That doesn't necessarily need to be the case, but it is the case today. I have another issue that I'm following up on for the side of like, why is that the case? But on the client side, I think we could help with this because what happens, or what can happen, is that some of our commands end up, well, they don't expose any way for the user to configure this. So they make a query with no limit, which gets propagated to a query with no limit on etcd. If you have a sufficient volume of a given type of resource, pod is the most obvious example of where this can happen, but theoretically it could be any resource in etcd, then you end up with gRPC errors because you're trying to return like an obscene volume of data back from etcd all at once, even though you may only need you're going to filter it, so you may only need 2 records when it comes down to it. So the 2 approaches that I think are most reasonable would be to just add a default limit under the hood. Git already has the chunk size parameter, which enables the customers who are using kubectl to configure it, but there are commands, notably drain and describe, that make list requests under the hood and don't don't expose chunk size option. So we could just add that limit under the hood is option 1 and not expose the flag. It will probably work for most people, but it could increase latency in some cases. And option 2 is actually take that chunk size flag. Whether or not we continue to call it chunk size is another question, but just more generally, take that chunk size flag, add it to those commands that are actually making list calls. Any thoughts?
Hi, Katrina. I was hoping to ask just a question, just because I don't know enough about the drain. And if you have a second, maybe we could just dig in for a couple seconds on how the chunk size affects the drain. So it looks like you mentioned that there's a pod listing that happens during the drain, and that's what you're trying to target. It sounds like nodes that have a lot of pods is where this might help. Is that correct?
Actually, the interesting thing is that it actually does not matter how many pods are on the node itself, because the request that we're making is to list pods with a selector. And that means that we're only ever going to get returned a small number of pods, theoretically. The number of pods per node can't be, gigabytes. Well, maybe it can be, but that would be pretty crazy. The problem is that even though ultimately there may be a small number of pods, the query that ends up getting made to etcd to retrieve the list that then gets filtered in the API server down to what's actually on the node, it's querying for every pod that exists in the database. So the request on our side is get with a selector, but that's still causing a full load from etcd.
Okay, so
Did that make sense?
Yeah, we're smashing etcd with a query of, okay. Is that a high level? So my understanding of drain is that I think that there's a cordon initially where the scheduler stops, will stop scheduling pods and workloads onto a particular node. Once that has happened for a while, then the control plane is going to try to kick everything off of that node. And
yeah, it's actually, sorry, it might just be worth pointing out that this doesn't, I opened about drain specifically, and then I dug in a bit more, and it seems like this affects not only drain, but definitely describe node, and possibly also cluster info dump and top pod, based on looking at, just looking through the code. But I've been able to confirm with drain and describe node. So it's anything that makes that query that is based on an in-memory, like that does actually ultimately limit the number of pods returned, but server side makes this huge query to etcd and then filters in memory in the API server. And it's that query that's the problem, so it doesn't matter if we would filter down after, because we don't succeed in making the query in the first place.
Cool. Appreciate the description, just so I could have a better idea what's going on. Thanks.
No problem. It took me a while to understand what was going on here, so happy to explain.
I tagged you on another issue just now. If you could take a look at that at some point. It might be tangentially related. I try to connect the dots on all these things. But we had issues with streaming results back with chunk size and request limit. So it could not be related at all, but I want to make sure it's on your radar.
Okay, I'll take a quick look at that. Any objections to exposing that flag on describe and drain at minimum? Okay, I'll work on a PR for that then. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. Cool. Did anyone else have any other topics? Otherwise, I had a quick demo to show. Okay. So we'll start with this. So a lot of what I usually focus on is developer experience for things. And so I'm sure you've all had to write YAML manifests from scratch. And it's kind of a pain, especially when you don't know all the parameters, and especially for like a beginner jumping in. You either go from starting with an empty file or copy and pasting an example or another like internal resource. And so I usually rely heavily on autocomplete. And so if you're using VS Code or Vim or just about anything, you're probably using the Red Hat language server under the hood, if you have any sort of like YAML completion. And so the nice thing about the Red Hat server is that it does, well, I'm not showing my screen anymore. Is that working?
I see VS Code.
Okay, cool. So the language server basically does the autocomplete for YAML manifests. It works with just about any YAML that's out there, but it needs a JSON schema, which is kind of like an open API schema, but there's some mixed up different keywords and stuff. And so anyways, right now you can't really autocomplete your cluster aware like CRD resources, for example. And I built a kubectl plugin that lets you take your open API schema, turn that into a JSON schema, and print it to standard out. So if I do a kubectl schema JSON, this is going to spit out a giant blob of JSON schema. And the terminal is pissed off, it looks like. Oh, did it actually freeze VS Code? Yeah, that's a lot of output, huh? All right, let me try that again. There we go. Okay. I don't use VS Code usually. Okay, so if we output that to a file, so I'll just call this schema.json, right? So this prints out that giant JSON schema, and I can create a new file, and I'll just call this like I don't know how to name the file. There we go. Manifest.yaml. And so the YAML language server from Red Hat, which most people are using under your editor somewhere, has support for defining a schema inline. You can also configure this somewhere else in your config files. And so you basically put in here YAML language server, and you say schema equals, and then you give it a URL path. So this is a file path or an HTTP path. So I'll just do file. Let's say temp demo schema.json. All right, so this is just the magic mode line in your editor. And so this actually is going to slurp up that completion, and now I'll have cluster aware completion. So I can toss in my API version, and let me grab, I have a CRD installed here. Let's grab cert manager. And then I need to specify a kind. So this has something to do, this is some bug with the YAML language server with multi-schema documents. But if I define a issuer, for example, so now I can actually complete on that. So give it a name of, test. And then for the spec, I can actually pull in that cluster aware CRD autocompletion. So I can toss on here, certificate authority, right? And it basically, it knows all the values from the schema. And the one I'm looking for, self-signed. It has support, it's basically the completion you're expecting with your enums, Acme. Oh, here it is. Okay, so it's Acme. All right, so you can toss in all your values, right? So you get the idea where this is going, right? And so the thing is that this relies on that JSON schema. And so right now there's no good way for a user to kind of get that schema. This obviously isn't the ideal experience, right? A user having to like print out the schema. I thought about potentially like wrapping the YAML language server with this functionality to grab it from your current cluster, right? Because in ideal world, a developer should just be able to open up a manifest. It should talk to their current context cluster and figure out how to give them completion there. So that's just a quick demo. I'd love some thoughts or feedback on this. I'll put a link in the chat to the GitHub repo. But I don't really know where to go from here other than playing with it and getting feedback. So
how would that kind of experience work if I have two different clusters with different sets of schema or conflicting sets of schemas in the worst case?
So right now, my thought is it would go off your current context. So if you swapped your current context in your kube config, you know, it would be cluster aware. Does that make sense?
Oh, well.
Oh, I'm disconnecting.
It tends to do that.
Hello? Sorry, I disconnected.
Kubectl, and I thought I'd just mention that the biggest difficulty in doing that was the shocking number of dependencies which became visible because kubectl and Kubernetes in general vendors everything, so they vendor all the deps. So when you submit a PR, the dependencies you're bringing in are very visible. That's a good practice. Kustomize doesn't do that. Kind doesn't do that. But I think we're going to start doing that. So for a couple of examples, what went wrong. So OpenAPI dependencies were brought in, and turns out there's transitive dependencies there on MongoDB. We had a dependency on HashiCorp's GoGetter functionality, which is really a nice way to download resources and customization files from various sources like S3 and GitHub and Azure data storage and GCP buckets. And naturally, that pulled in a boatload of dependencies too. The dependencies are just really out of control for that particular module. So on the Kustomize side, Kustomize in the future is going to continue to go forward as a standalone CLI, but it's also going to be a library. And we just generally need to be much more careful about what dependencies get pulled in that library as opposed to what get pulled into the CLI. CLI can be a little bit more relaxed, but the library, no, because other people, including kubectl, depend on that library. And we can't just make it a mess. And I think this is, as modules get more popular now, I think people will have to be a little bit more careful about what kind of dependencies they're bringing in. So if anybody has any ideas or tools to help with the, like I'd really like to see the transitive dependencies without having a vendor, because vendor is going to make a big mess because you're copying all of the code into the repository. But that's what we're going to do if we can't find a better solution. That's all.
You mentioned some examples of dependencies that were a big problem. Did we have to completely eliminate those in order to get our PR merged, or are they still there and we're trying to get rid of them now?
Some. So I got rid of HashiCorp's the GoGetter, which then forced a major version change, of course, in the customized library, because that's a big dependency that dropped. That's going to impact people. I want to bring it back in, but through the mechanism I just described, where the API depends on it, or the API does not depend on it, but the CLI does. Starlark dependencies, the dependency in the Starlark interpreter is still in there, but we're going to get rid of that in a patch that's coming down the pipeline. So yeah, some things we kept out, but some things was just too late and they went in. It was better to introduce a couple of dependencies that don't really matter, and then get them out in patch PRs, then to like miss the deadline. And then there was other, it's a trade-off. We got rid of a lot of bad dependencies by introducing a few new bad dependencies. So, but we can get rid of those new ones now very easily by just the PRs now to kubectl will just be incrementing a patch number in a Go mod file, as opposed to, you know, crazy code reviews that have to be reviewed very carefully. That's the hope, anyway.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
So for those not that familiar with Customize, Jeff, the biggest change that we've introduced, or at least one of the biggest changes, is that the Customize is no longer depending on a specific version of the API. Is that correct?
Right. Customize was a big experiment in the idea of adding functionality and solving some long-standing issues that were in kubectl. Its origins were in issues that were in kubectl, but it was developed outside of kubectl to explore this notion of a rapid development of a freestanding repo. Another approach would have been feature branches or whatever. So the initial version of Customize depended on API machinery, but the API machinery lives, even though they're called API, aren't really API in the sense that other tools cannot depend on them and then be transitively brought back in to kubectl. So that dependency, in order for Customize to exist inside kubectl, that dependency had to be broken. So we now have this new module called KYAML, which takes the YAML libraries that everybody uses, that kubectl depends on, and other people depend on. It's sort of the Go standard for managing YAML. This new library is called KYAML, or new module is called KYAML, and it adds Kubernetes awareness to the YAML libraries. So things like object meta and type meta are now in those libraries. So you can do all sorts of cool things in the Kubernetes world, in this sort of cross. It's the Venn diagram of Kubernetes and YAML. So that library is now maintained as part of the Customize repository, and I think more functionality is going to shift from Customize down into that library until the Customize layer is really a thin thing, and it kind of fades into kubectl and fades into KYAML.
Sounds kind of like unstructured object as opposed to like core V1 pod. Like,
yeah, it replaces all that unstructured stuff. Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for all that work. I know that was a huge effort. Thanks for everyone who contributed to that.
I think I'm back now. I got disconnected. Sorry. Nick, what were you saying before I dropped off?
Oh, I just asked about the multi-cluster scenario for your example.
Did my answer come through?
I think so, yeah. I think you answered just before you dropped off, so yeah. But partially, I think you said that you would, what would be the mechanics of it? There be something which automatically detects that context switch and you would regenerate the schema, or like what would be the layering?
So in a like ideal world, I'd imagine I'd hate to wrap the language server from YAML, from Red Hat, but that's the only way I see it being like a really good experience. And it would just go off of your current cluster. So if you switch your current context in your kubeconfig, then it would, grab the schema and regenerate that. But I'd hate to have to do that, but I can't think of any other way to make it so, you don't have to generate it yourself, write it out to a disk, plug in the mode line and all that jazz.
Yeah, or also it's like we've had scenarios where like if I want to do a dash kubeconfig or dash context, a very kind of ad hoc or ephemeral kind of context switch, that sort of complicates some of these experiences.
Yeah.
Maybe a somewhat related problem is that you can, with the customized configuration functions, you can write or look a lot like client-side CRs, and you can write schemas for those. I know I've worked with some of that. So those wouldn't be available on the server, but it would be cool if I could have like a directory that would like union some types that I provided schemas for from my client-side types with what's actually available on the server and how that get picked up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I need to show this to Natasha as well, because I remember Natasha talking about wanting to generate your cluster schema, writing it out and using it for customize, right? Wasn't there a KEP for that?
Yes, there was. I'm not sure if Natasha's in the call, but she's adding more OpenAPI foo to the customers libraries.
Yeah, and so right now it just prints out the JSON schema, right? So I just have kubectl schema JSON, but could easily just put in OpenAPI and it can just write out the OpenAPI the same way. The benefit I see there is otherwise you have to like do you got a proxy and then you got to curl your endpoint, and it kind of just automates all that for you. So
yeah, that's very cool.
Okay. Any other topics or stand-ups? All right. I guess everyone gets 20 minutes back of their day. So thanks for coming, everyone, and see you again in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Eddie.
Bye.
See you, folks.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Katrina.
Bye-bye.
Nice.